Success breeds confidence. And confidence locks us into ways of doing things, into resistance for change. The biggest challenge for the warfighter is to anticipate the changes in the nature of war and the environment that we're going to be participating in, and to prepare our forces for success in the next war. But that resistance to change is our biggest challenge. The failure to anticipate the changes in warfare that occurred due to the introduction of the machine gun, despite decades to study the lessons of the Civil War in America, are an example of a failure to innovate. It wasn't just the tank, it wasn't just the airplane, and it wasn't just the radio that revolutionized warfare going into World War II, but it was the integration of those systems together into something new that changed how warfare was fought. One side anticipated that and ended up with blitzkrieg. The other side didn't and was overrun in the initial years of warfare. A failure to change, a failure to challenge assumptions because they resisted change resulted in these types of warfare we saw as we went into those major world conflicts. We must do better now. We are in a time of transition. We're in an interwar period between combat between major superpowers or global alliances. We as airmen have been wildly successful. We as war fighters in the military have been widely successful. But there are two major things that we must overcome if we want to overcome our resistance to change. One is ourselves, and one is then the ability to understand how the environment around us is changing. The challenges we face as airmen will not remain static. The truth is, President Reagan once called us the shining city upon the hill. Who doesn't like this view? We've worked as that city on the hill to build a nation that is an example to the world. We've built a world based on interlocking alliances, international institutions, free trade, human rights. We've championed these global causes in the name of our own national security. We like the view, we like the world we've created. We as warfighters have benefited from this. We as airmen have come to enjoy our view from the city and the hill. We as warfighters make certain assumptions based on the success we've had about how warfare will be as we move forward. We don't want to change this. It's natural to not want to change this. As a matter of fact, I stand here as someone who knows too much. 23 years of warfare since Desert Storm, we've created mental models. We've created operating systems in our minds that allow us to frame information we get, take a very complex world, and make rapid judgments, rapid decisions about what's important, about what's not important. And that's what allows us to get through the day. But those schema, those models that we use to get through the day also blind us to different things that are changing in the world around us. They blind us to what's not going on, or to what is going on that we don't want to recognize. The fact that we've been the sole superpower and the world has been framed in the way that the United States wanted it to be. We've used our overwhelming diplomatic, information, military, and economic power to create a world we enjoy. And we as airmen have become the centerpiece for much of the projection, not just for military, but for humanitarian assistance and for diplomacy. But we have to be willing to mess with success. We have to be willing to break down what's not broken. Something that works today will not work tomorrow. So as we work to overcome those schema, those mental models we have, we also have to recognize that that challenge to overcome those schema is driven by our human nature. We are naturally resistant to change. I said that success breeds confidence, and confidence brings resistance to change. Well, the truth is, those mental models we use, if something doesn't fit into those, we experience something called cognitive dissidence. Cognitive dissidence is that uncomfortable feeling that each and every one of us feel when things don't fit into the models that we expect them to. As a matter of fact, we will go out of our way, won't we, to ignore things or to discount things. We work very, very hard at making things fit into our mental models. That resistance to change, because we're uncomfortable with it, is also, in our case, buttressed by the fact that we're in a zero-sum world. Within the warfighting departments in the DoD, we've got the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines all competing in a zero-sum pie. It's very, very difficult for us to have honest, open discussions and evaluations about the environment that we're in and about the world that we intend to fight in the future. Because if we show weakness, someone may come grab our piece of the pie. And that natural competition, that human nature to compete, drives our mental models and makes us resist change. But this is also a function of our culture, a function of the way we grow up. Perhaps as Westerners, perhaps as airmen, the most technophile of the services, we like new. We like shiny. We like faster. We like better. We like more integrated. We like things that are advanced. As a matter of fact, we will prefer those to what's good enough today. But what does that trap us into? What does that sort of approach drive as far as the weapon systems we create? The numbers of them that we're allowed to create as we get ever more complex, ever more integrated systems. And it's just this. It's this resistance to change, this natural competition, and our culture that makes us risk adverse. Because if we show weakness, if we mess with what works today, we're afraid we may be setting ourselves up for failure tomorrow. And it's so much easier in public, and it's so much easier in our own minds to take it easy and take the easy way out. Because the truth is, that view from on top of the hill, that system of interlocking alliances, that system of relationships, the force we have built, are all built upon an interlocking series of assumptions about how we're going to operate as a nation and how we're going to operate as a military force. Think about our concepts of operations. Think about the basing force structure we have. Think about the manning force structure we have. That's all driven by these assumptions about how the world works, about how our military is going to be able to project power in the future, and what we're going to be asked to do. But the truth is, a failure to anticipate the changes in those relationships as the environment inevitably changes from beneath us, much like this wave action is going to undercut this cliff, will cause a cascade of failures that we do not anticipate and that we are not prepared for. And it is this cascade of failures that challenges us as warfighters. This is what we need to think through and how we need to prepare ourselves during an interwar period when we have to break and then rebuild sometimes in order to succeed, to not be those who failed to anticipate the changes in warfare and the nature of war. So there's two things I'm going to talk to you about, two big groups that I'm going to talk to you about. They're driving that underlying erosion of those interlocking assumptions. The first one is the changes in our environment. That environment is being changed by technology. Whether we like it or not, technology is changing at an exponential rate. Each and every one of us probably in this room has a smartphone in their pocket. No one set out to to create that smartphone. Nobody set out to individually make the advances in battery technology, the femtosecond lasers it takes to cut that glass, the miniaturization of the components that are inside there, the wireless networks that run that thing, the code that runs those apps that we can't live a day without today. Nobody designed that from the ground up. As a matter of fact, that was a recombination of technologies in completely unanticipated ways that revolutionized how we interact as people today. And I'd argue, in some ways, how cultures are interacting. But here's the interesting piece. So it's not just those individual advances, it's the innovative recombination of those that is really powerful. It's that innovative combination of the tank, the airplane, and the radio that changed World War II. The interesting part of that is, though, that Within the United States, the government today only has eyes on about 30% of the innovation that's being done. That's a function of our success in creating a stable economic environment. We only know about 30% of what's happening, which means 70% of what's happening in the United States, we as warfighters don't really have a good eye on. So that's being driven commercially. We need to integrate that. But what's really, really interesting is I can use those same numbers and tell you that only 30% of what's being done in the world is being done in the United States. So statistically, where's that next iPhone come from? Where does that next blitzkrieg come up? That innovative thought is not our purview. The success we've had in creating a global environment is exactly what we need to be looking at when we question our assumptions as warfighters, as we challenge our success to move forward. That technology proliferates. What happens today can be used tomorrow halfway around the world. This is Thomas Friedman's flat world, especially with the advances in digital movement. We digitize money, we digitize music, we digitize movies. Now we're digitizing things. Have you thought about that? We're digitizing things with additive manufacturing, sometimes called 3D printing, to where what I create today over here can be stolen, sold, or just given away. And tomorrow it's being printed out and prototyped and used against me, or in competition with me, or maybe with me. But that proliferation is happening at a rate that we have not yet come to grips with, and we actually want to ignore. We don't want to see. And the truth is, we're moving into new domains. We, as warfighters, have treated the domains of cyber and space that we led as they were beginning to be developed, and now they're being taken over commercially. We treat them as support infrastructure, not the real integrating infrastructure that they are. They're not support anymore. They are critical to our find, fix, target, track, engage, assess, change. But because we don't treat them as operational domains, we don't man them, we don't organize them, and we blind ourselves to the ability to use them to project power. Can we say the same about adversaries and others that are coming behind us, that are the second movers, that are looking at ways to undermine those layers of assumptions that we've built our strategies upon? Not just the technologies, though. It's also the resources. And as warfighters, we have to be really good thinkers and understand it's not just what we want, it's what our nation is capable of, what our world is capable of. And the truth is that we are going to be entering a period of domestic allocation discussions and arguments that we've not seen since World War II. This choice between national security and social security is very real. And we as warfighters have to understand that. And we have to be realistic about our discussions about how national security and social security combine and what our objectives are as a nation and how we achieve them. We have to be willing to question some underlying assumptions that we have. Is jointness the right way to go? Do we need an Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines? Are we fighting to control and dominate? Or are we projecting power on behalf of the nation merely to frustrate an adversary's ability to control and dominate? We have to be willing to ask these questions as we face these challenges, remembering that we're technophiles, remembering that we're in competition internally and externally, and that we're building ever more expensive, ever more integrated systems. But as we build more and more systems that are more and more expensive and more fragile, are we going in the right directions? Because the truth is that all that success we had economically, building international institutions, all that success has meant that the rest are rising too. While we struggle and work with those domestic allocation discussions, while we look to reset how we are operating as a nation, they're rising. And this is a good thing. This is what we wanted. This is what we've been working for as a nation. But as warfighters, we have to recognize that many of those nations, through the proliferation of technology, through that innovation, are rising, and they're putting a lot of that investment into their military capabilities, especially when they have regional capabilities or regional interests. We have global ones. There's a disconnect. There's a discontinuity between what we're looking at there. And if they can focus that effort because perhaps they have an authoritarian government and achieve a focus of purpose to develop those military capabilities in a way that we've only been able to achieve in response to World War I, World War II, perhaps even the events after 9/11. If they can do that because their government is capable of focusing their resources in a way that we aren't, as they rise, this relative difference shrinks. Not that we fall, but it shrinks. And that's something we have to understand, because at what point do we have to look at peers? At what point do we have to question our ability to dominate our domains and our environments? So this leads me to questioning 4 different assumptions we have. You can break these down. We could have 20 assumptions. I'm just going to talk about 4 today. The first one is power projection. What are our assumptions about basing, about forward basing, about our allies' willingness to let us use bases, our ability to operate from bases that are under attack as peers within regions develop capabilities to attack us and our bases? What sort of weapon systems, what sort of concepts of operations would we change if we knew we couldn't use those forward bases? How would our force structure look different? How would we mess with the success we've worked so hard to get? The targets we're going against. Are the targets going to be the same in the future warfare? I'd argue not. Our adversaries have looked at our success over the last 30 years. They don't make fixed targets anymore. They make them small, fast, networked, mobile, and if they can't be those, they're hard and deeply buried. Well, that's a lot different type of target set. It requires different weapons, and it certainly requires us to question our assumption that we're going to be able to orbit overhead and drop one bomb to hit one target after gathering intelligence for 24 hours. That's a different type of system. And as a matter of fact, if we can't orbit overhead, we've got to think about the sensors we're using to gather information, the way we're processing information, and we're getting it in there. We may have to be doing this from long range. And that's a completely different force structure and maybe different weapons. We also need to question the assumption about the weapons we've got because of the rise of defense. Defense, whether we like it or not, is undergoing the same revolution that has made us successful in projecting power in the last several decades. When precision becomes ubiquitous, when everybody has precision, it's not just our purview, not just the purview of the offense, how does that complicate our basing infrastructure? How does that complicate how we park airplanes? How does this complicate how we do refueling? Friendly forces are going to have to be defended in ways that we do not know. Ubiquitous precision is going to change everything in warfare. As a matter of fact, if the weapons themselves become vulnerable in flight again, our military warfighter concept of one weapon per target that we've been fighting for decades and decades is suddenly called into question. Do we suddenly have a magazine depth problem where we don't have enough weapons to fight through directed energy, rail guns, and advanced defenses that can not only target our aircraft, but can target those weapons in flight as they're pushed ever farther and further away? And that's going to lead us to have to challenge our assumption about the kinetic portion of the find, fix, target, track, engage, assess chain as being the most important piece. If we can't get weapons in all the time, if we've got limited magazine depth, we have to know what to hit and when to hit it. And if our sensors aren't overhead gathering information, we're going to have to use sensors that are organic in an environment, move that information out, correlate that with databases, make decisions and get that information back into the environment, into the shooter, in a way we don't think about today, and we may not be prepared to do. We've got to protect that entire chain. And that leads us to this questioning of the domination of the domains. All of our planning, all of our assumptions are that we're going to be able to dominate and have access to air, space, cyber. We'll actually have land and maritime forces that are there in support of us. And those may not be true in this new world. So how do we have to change as peer and niche competitors, especially those with regional interests, begin to challenge us? At what point does our love for technology and integrated systems catch up with us? And that when we're going against peer competitors, peers with similar technology capabilities, through proliferation of technology in regions, at what point does quantity come back? Quantity has a quality of all of its own, and this is a cyclical problem. But if we're not honest and don't admit that we may be coming into a region where that becomes important again, we won't have the right discussions as airmen, as warfighters, or as strategists, because we like that view on the hill. We love the world we've created. We like our success, and we're resistant to change. But inevitably, if we don't question our assumptions, we will at best become isolated. We will at worst watch our foundations of assumptions crumble beneath us, leaving us in a position that we are uncomfortable with. We have to be willing to change. The biggest challenge for warfighters is ourselves in this time of interwar period and this time of transition. Thank you very much.